Hi again then guys, and it's been a little while since we ran through our last car review on Forza Horizon 3, but now we are back again and back with a bang for the Hennessey Venom GT, one of the top tier hypercars in the game, of course, a notoriously fast machine, far faster than the Veyron in terms of 0 to 200 mph acceleration. Now of course it's kind of been overshadowed by the Koenigsegg Agera RS with the new real world speed record, but of course Hennessey is fighting back with the new Venom F5, a car which, I don't know, I'm not really sold on yet visually. I'm not really a fan of its looks. But, speaking of the looks, that's where I'm probably different from the rest of the crowd, because at least that car does look more unique, whereas this one has always been a visually controversial choice of car, because many people, for obvious reasons, have always considered the Venom to be basically a heavily modified Lotus. That's about as far from the truth as you could reasonably get, given that only the roof and the doors actually come from a Lotus. All of the rest is Hennessey, so not exactly a modified Lotus. It certainly looks like one, but at the same time, is that a bad thing? It looks good. A Lotus that is pumped up in terms of its proportions is a pretty great looking machine, and in fact this car pays a very nice homage to Lotus's very own Elise GT1. It's a very similar looking car. But what isn't controversial is that this car is fast. Real fast. So, to break down exactly how competitive it can be, in my opinion, of course, we're going to break it down into our 5 individual categories as usual. So first up we have the handling, and for the handling on the Venom, I'm going to give it a moderate 3, which is basically the middle of the line. 3 out of 5 isn't bad, but at the same time, the handling on the car isn't necessarily bad. In fact, it's more manoeuvrable than something like a Veyron. The main disadvantage is getting the power and torque down through a lightweight rear-wheel drive chassis with minimal downforce at best, in a similar way to an SSC Ultimate Aero, which has exactly the same problem. Now at the same time, that doesn't make it a bad handling car either, it just makes it more challenging, in a similar way to something like a Koenigsegg, for instance, or the aforementioned SSC. So a 3, I think, accurately represents what this car can do. Of course, all-wheel drive makes a huge difference to the handling. It makes it much better, I would say, in the case of this car, but that's for driver to decide for themselves. What isn't too surprising, though, is going to be my scores for both acceleration and top-end speed, because first of all, for that acceleration, of course, I'm going to give it a full 5, because although it doesn't launch like an all-wheel drive car, at least not in stock form, the mid-range and even top-end speed is so fast, in a very similar way to a Koenigsegg, that there's actually very little, especially untuned cars, that can even come close. Unfortunately, we can't increase the power anymore on this car, which is unfortunate given that it's actually a lot less powerful than many other cars in the game now, but still, even with the power that it has, with roughly a 300 horsepower disadvantage over many of the other cars in the game when fully tuned, it does pretty well with the power that it's given, that's for sure. And of course, as far as top-end speed as well, it's going to be another very strong 5, because even without any tuning at all, you can easily hit 268 miles per hour. With tuning, it only bumps up to about 270, 271 generally. You might be able to push it a little bit more, but it's not as quick as you might hope, especially not when you've got stuff like Jaguars doing 280, 290, 300 miles per hour, and Bugatti EB110s hitting over 280 as well. So that's kind of a shame, but at the same time, it's still quite well placed given that the Veyron Supersport and the Koenigsegg 1-to-1 don't really go that far above 270 either, so it's actually quite competitive. It is, of course, easily a full 5 though for top-end speed. As far as value for money, well, I'm going to give it a 4. And the reason why is because it's definitely not the most affordable of exotics at 1.2 million credits, but at the same time, that is actually a very good price. That's 1 million credits cheaper than the Veyron Supersport, it's also 500,000 credits cheaper than the EB110, and it's a whole lot cheaper than the Koenigsegg 1-to-1. So it's actually a lot cheaper than most of its rivals, especially most of its main rivals. So value for money is actually quite good on this one. Plus, for 1.2 million, it is a genuinely rapid car. Perhaps not for everyone in terms of its handling, that's for sure, but if you get it right, the Venom is a very competitive machine. And speaking about that competitive nature, I am finally going to give the usability of the car, in terms of the classes it can run in, how useful it can be, a 3. And the reason why is because it's very limited. It's only in the S2 class. It can borderline get into the X class, up to 998, but not quite. So its range of use is limited, but at the same time within that class, especially for straight line speed of course, not much else can come close. There are some, as we've mentioned, but it's a very good car in that class. It's just a shame that it's so limited to it. Overall then, that means that I'm giving the Venom GT a score of 80, which places it quite nicely, not as high as something like a 1-to-1, but definitely higher overall than a Veyron Supersport, which I think is about right for this car. It's certainly not perfect, but it has a whole lot to offer. Overall then, that's it for this particular pick. I'll see you guys next time, and as always, thanks for watching.